Hi, my name is Michelle Sloan Jones. I'm the Chief External Affairs Officer for Money Management International, and I am so pleased to be here with you today. We have a really meaty topic to dig into, and it's one that I really hope brings you a lot of value. MMI is a national nonprofit provider of financial counseling services, and over the past few years, under a program called Project Porchlight, we have been providing financial recovery services to people who are working to overcome the impact of a natural disaster. Most recently, we have pivoted those resources very quickly and effectively to help people overcome the financial fallout associated with the coronavirus pandemic. I want to share with you today some of what we've learned through this process in the hopes that you can apply some of our lessons to supporting the financial health of your customers, clients, constituencies, and communities. When you picture a natural disaster, you probably envision things like infrastructure damage and uprooted trees and emergency vehicles. But what I want to invite you to imagine is the long, difficult, and often unobserved component of recovering from a disaster that's the financial recovery. Financial recovery is multifaceted, it's multi year, and it's impacted by the inequities that we know exist across race, gender, and socioeconomic status. We also know that attending to the financial health aspect of disaster recovery is absolutely critical to the long term outcomes of impacted communities and their people for generations to come. So, what does the research tell us? Unfortunately, there has been some really quality studies done on the long term financial health impact of natural disasters. And what these studies generally show us is that low to moderate income households are both slower to recover and have a less complete recovery as compared to their more affluent neighbors. Now, why is this? One reason that may come to mind is pretty intuitive, and that's if you have a lower income, you have fewer discretionary dollars that are available that you can redirect towards your recovery. Another thing that might come to mind for you, especially if you work in the housing space, is the impact the disaster has on housing stock and affordability. But there are some other barriers to recovery that in our work have really stood out to us. And interestingly, those barriers are very similar to the barriers that we see when people are working to address a wide variety of financial challenges. The obstacles, the experience gaps, the mistakes that are made, many of those are the same. But what we also see is that if you provide people with the support, the tools, the education on systems that's necessary to address those challenges, you are also providing access to skills that can be leveraged outside of a disaster. You are, in effect, building financially healthier, more resilient, and financially capable communities and client bases. So here's the big idea. You can leverage your disaster response protocols to positively impact the financial trajectory of people's lives. If you're interested in improving the overall financial health of your clients, if you want to de-risk your customer base and your loan portfolios, if you want to improve the long-term financial stability and health of entire communities, investing in financial recovery after a disaster is a really effective way to do those things. And by investing in recovery today, you're providing resilience against disasters and other economic downturns tomorrow. So, what are those common barriers? There are 5 that I'm going to share with you today. The first, experience dealing with red tape and bureaucratic systems. The second is limited access to credit. The third is identifying and avoiding scams. The fourth is a lack of familiarity with resources that are available to help. And finally, the fifth is experience modifying your budget and reprioritizing your debts in response to a crisis. So let's talk a little more about those. Experience dealing with red tape and bureaucratic systems. If you have experience filling out, perfecting, and existing documents, you are more likely to take the steps that require those skills after a disaster. And if you have successfully done those types of things previously, you have faith that those steps and those processes will work for you again. If you don't have that experience, it is completely unfamiliar, it's intimidating, and you're not likely to have a lot of faith in the process. It's also high consequence because if you make a mistake and get it wrong, there's not a lot of opportunity to go back and make that right. Navigating through those systems and processes is a skill. The second, access to credit. When recovering from a disaster, most people rely, at least in part, on credit to help them get through. If you have a lower credit score, you're less likely to qualify for loans and more likely to turn to non-traditional forms of credit, sell your belongings, or simply not make progress, sometimes for years. Evaluating your options for credit, making the right use in the right order, understanding and making good decisions about the trade-offs to impact your credit score, that's a skill. The third barrier, identifying and avoiding scams. It is incredibly easy for bad actors to convince you to pay for something and then never show up again. If you don't know that FEMA shouldn't be charging you for an inspection, it seems reasonable to pay for this. It seems official. It's not. Learning to identify and avoid scams, that is a skill. The fourth thing, accessing resources that are available to help you. If you don't already know where to go for help, figuring that out after a disaster is nearly impossible. People who are connected to community groups, who understand their resources, the supports to which they're entitled, those people are more likely to know where to turn for help and to be successful doing so. People who don't know where to go and are likely to get left behind. Identifying and understanding the network of resources available to you, that is a skill. And then finally, the fifth thing, experience with modifying your budget and reprioritizing your debts in the face of a crisis. Understanding the trade-offs that you need to make today to help cover your needs while also protecting your options for the future. That is a real balancing act. We make emotionally driven decisions about money all the time. And in the aftermath of a disaster, that is no difference. That's no different. But we know that with the support of an expert guide, we can help people make decisions that advance their position over time. And this is a skill. I've referenced these repeatedly as skills because they are acquirable. But in the wake of a disaster, this is a ridiculously steep learning curve. And asking people to learn a new skill set in the midst of a crisis when their world has been upended is just not realistic. But if you provide access to an expert resource, a financial coach to help you along the way, your clients don't have to have all those skills themselves in order to be successful. They will have access to their coach's skill set, and working with an expert through that process serves as a critical transfer of knowledge. However you do it, whether it's through a financial counseling resource like Project Porchlight, whether you build it yourself, whether you find another resource, if you attend to the financial health of your clients, your customers, and your communities after a disaster, you will be creating healthier clients, customers, and communities overall. And I would also suggest that with these supports in place, what you may find is that your customers and your bottom line continue to improve to the point where it makes sense to expand your services from the inflection point of a disaster to a standing business practice. I want to take this for you from kind of this theoretical and bring it home for you in a very real kind of way. And to do that, I'm going to tell you the story of one of our clients, Linda. On November the 8th, 2018, Camp Fire swept through the town of Paradise, California. The fire took the lives of 85 people and destroyed most of the town, including Linda's home of 23 years. When Linda called MMI more than a year later, we were literally her last resort. Linda and the other survivors of Camp Fire had had to wait almost a year before they could return to the town. That was a year of uncertainty, a year of trying to replace lost belongings, and a year of being apart from their neighbors, their faith organizations, and their social support systems. It was also a year of feeling like the rest of the world had moved on and that they had been left behind. In working with Linda, she had struggled with 4 out of the 5 barriers that I had told you about earlier. The first was experience dealing with red tape and bureaucratic systems. That was a skill that Linda just did not have. When she came to us, she'd been denied assistance from FEMA. She didn't know that she could have appealed that denial. Linda had been deeply traumatized by the fires, and she was attempting to apply for an SBA loan. She was unable to get through the form, in large part due to her trauma. As a consequence, she missed the filing deadline, which she felt incredibly guilty about, and which added further to her trauma. The second challenge was access to credit. Linda had already applied for loans to rebuild her home and been denied. She was living on a fixed income and she couldn't qualify for the full amount that she needed. Linda had made a very common mistake. She used her insurance money to pay off her mortgage. That meant that she had very little left over to rebuild. Thankfully, the third barrier that I spoke about, scams, that was the one challenge that Linda did not encounter. But the fourth, access to resources. When Linda came to us, she was in tears. She thought that she was out of options and had exhausted all of her resources. But in fact, that just wasn't true. As a matter of fact, through the course of our work with her, Linda was able to apply for a variety of resources, including a special grant for survivors, a small low-interest rebuilding loan, and a loan from the town of Paradise that was specifically designed to help cover the gap between insurance proceeds and the actual cost of rebuilding. And the fifth challenge, experience modifying a budget and prioritizing debts in response to a crisis. When Linda came to us, her budget simply was not in alignment with her current reality and with the next steps that she needed to take. Linda's counselor was able to help her build a budget that fit both her income and supported her long-term rebuilding goals. Linda is in the process of rebuilding her home today. When she finishes, she will have already paid off part of her loans, and the remaining loan payment will be well within her budget. Today, she better understands her loans and her insurance. She's also able to contribute to savings, and she is already financially healthier and more capable than she was at the time of the fire. If you give people the support, the tools, and the educational systems necessary to address these challenges post-disaster, you're providing a path to full financial recovery for people who could not have gotten there otherwise. And you're providing access to a skill set that can be applied outside of the disaster. You can leverage your disaster response protocols to positively impact the financial trajectory of people's lives, which is exactly what we saw with Linda. There is so much good that can be done when you put supports in place to help people overcome financial challenges. And by doing so, you're also building resiliency so that when the next challenge comes along, those people are more equipped to handle it. They come from a stronger starting position, and that allows us to redirect aid, support, dollars to the next group of people who need our assistance. There is a lot of good work to be done. We know how to do it, and I hope you will join me. Thank you.